Welcome back to Royal Idiots, the show where history hands someone a crown, a castle, a continent's worth of authority, and they respond with decisions that feel like they were made during a fever dream. Today's episode is a little different, because we're talking about a guy who, for once, seems like he actually understood the assignment.
Which is exactly why fate immediately drop-kicks him into the nearest medieval hazard.
Exactly. Episode 3, Geoffrey II, Duke of Brittany. The Plantagenet brother you don't hear about as much, mostly because the other Plantagenets were out there doing such loud, flamboyant chaos that Geoffrey's brand of quiet scheming got drowned out.
He's like the guy in a group project who actually reads the rubric, but the rest of the team is setting the classroom on fire and arguing with the teacher.
And for anyone who's new here, the Plantagenets are that medieval dynasty where every family gathering feels like it should come with waivers and emergency exits. Think England and France, massive landholdings, complicated feudal rules, and a family tree that looks less like a tree and more like a knife fight.
So what's our hook today? Because you call Geoffrey the smartest brother, and in this family, that's like being the most responsible raccoon in a dumpster.
The hook is this: Geoffrey might be the most strategically gifted of Henry II's sons. And because this is Royal Idiots, his story is a perfect lesson in how medieval politics rewards cunning right up until it doesn't, and then you simply die in the dumbest way possible.
I'm already bracing myself. Let's set the stage. Who is Geoffrey in the Plantagenet lineup?
He's one of the sons of Henry II of England and Eleanor of Aquitaine, which is basically medieval power couple meets ongoing domestic Cold War. The brothers include Richard, who becomes Richard the Lionheart; John, who becomes King John, a man who could turn a winning hand into a lawsuit; and Geoffrey, who becomes Duke of Brittany through marriage.
Marriage. The medieval version of a hostile takeover, but with more church paperwork.
Right. Geoffrey marries Constance of Brittany. And this is important, not just because it's romantic in the way a land deed is romantic, but because Brittany is not some irrelevant corner of the map. It's strategically placed, it's culturally distinct, and the nobles there have their own priorities. It's not simply an English province you can boss around without pushback.
So he's not just gaining a title. He's stepping into a political ecosystem that doesn't automatically love his family.
Exactly. And Geoffrey, unlike some of his relatives, seems to understand that you don't rule places like Brittany by shouting your resume and expecting applause. Breton politics were their own complicated web, with local aristocrats who expected consultation, negotiation, and, this is the key, respect for their autonomy.
So Geoffrey's first big move is basically, don't treat Brittany like it's just an extension of Dad's empire.
He plays it smart. He positions himself as a legitimate Breton duke, not merely Henry II's kid parachuted in. And that matters because his family's empire, often called the Angevin realm, is held together through a mix of inheritance, conquest, law, and constant emotional blackmail.
The Angevin realm, a political structure held together by paperwork, war horses, and spite.
That's the one. Now, inside that realm, Geoffrey is not operating in a peaceful family situation. Henry II's sons repeatedly rebel against him. There are shifting alliances, promises made and broken, castles swapped like trading cards, and the looming question of succession. Who gets what, and who gets left with the medieval equivalent of a participation ribbon?
And if you get left with a participation ribbon, you start a civil war.
Yes, that's the standard response. Now here's where Geoffrey's reputation comes in. Chroniclers often paint him as intelligent, persuasive, and extremely good at political manipulation. He's not the guy charging into battle waving a sword and a slogan. He's the guy making sure the battle happens at all, at the time and place that benefits him.
So he's a family's chess player, surrounded by brothers who think the bishop is a type of enemy unit.
Great comparison. Geoffrey is a schemer, possibly the most dangerous kind, because he can operate across multiple courts. He's in Brittany, but he's also connected to English and French politics. He can play local Breton interests against Plantagenet family rivalries, and vice versa.
This is where I need the family drama. How is he manipulating his brothers?
Think of it like this. Henry II wants control and stability. The sons want power and territory. Richard wants recognition and keeps an eye on Aquitaine. John wants literally anything he can grab. Geoffrey wants influence, real leverage. And Geoffrey's best lever is that he can be the hinge between different factions. He can support a brother's rebellion just enough to weaken Dad, then pivot and negotiate. Or he can hint to Dad that he'll keep a brother in line if he's rewarded properly.
So he's essentially freelancing in the family Civil War economy.
Yes, and he's good at it. That's the thing. When we say royal idiots, we're usually talking about rulers who make cartoonish mistakes. Geoffrey's mistake, if you can call it that, is existing in a system where competence doesn't protect you from random catastrophe.
Before we get to the catastrophe, I want to zoom in on Brittany for a second. What makes ruling there tricky?
Brittany had its own identity and its own network of noble families. Dukes couldn't just issue commands and expect obedience the way a centralizing king might dream of doing. Geoffrey had to negotiate with Breton lords and maintain legitimacy not only through bloodlines and marriage, but through behavior.
So medieval dynastic strategy isn't just marry the heiress and cash the check. You still have to manage the room.
Exactly. Dynastic strategy is long-term. It's marriages, hostages, oaths, alliances, and those little legal traps like, oh, you swore fealty in 1172, remember that? We do. Geoffrey's marriage gives him a claim, but his political skill is what helps him use that claim without Brittany erupting into constant revolt.
And meanwhile, the Angevin realm itself is basically a patchwork quilt. Different laws, customs, languages, and feudal expectations.
Right. And that patchwork nature is important because it creates opportunities for someone like Geoffrey. If you understand the differences, you can exploit them. You can argue one legal principle in one region and a different norm in another. It's flexible, which is a polite way of saying it's constantly at risk of tearing apart.
So Geoffrey's plan, if we can call it that, was to dominate the internal power struggle?
That's the impression we get from how he positions himself. His building a base in Brittany. His weaving relationships. His playing peacemaker when it benefits him and troublemaker when it benefits him. If the Plantagenet brothers are all competing to inherit or control chunks of the empire, Geoffrey is one of the few who seems capable of turning that competition into an advantage.
So basically, he's setting himself up to be the brother who isn't just reacting. He's shaping the board.
Yes, and that's why some historians and chroniclers treat him as uniquely formidable. Not necessarily likable. Not necessarily heroic. But dangerous.
And in a family where the baseline is dangerous, that's saying something.
Now, let's talk about the big irony. We've got this guy with political instincts, a strategic marriage, a regional power base, and a talent for pulling strings. In another world, Geoffrey becomes the central figure of this dynasty's story.
But in this world, he meets the medieval sporting industry.
Exactly. Geoffrey dies in a tournament accident. And it's hard to overstate how absurd that is in context. We're talking about a man navigating feudal politics, playing relatives off one another, handling complex regional power structures, and then the universe says, cool, now take this expensive helmet and go do a risky hobby in front of a crowd.
This is the moment where I want to file a complaint with history. All the incompetent people live forever, and the one guy who can read a map dies because he wanted some jousting clout.
And tournaments weren't just games. They were training, prestige, networking, and propaganda. Showing up mattered. Being seen mattered. It's like if your political career depended on doing stunt driving at conferences.
So it's not purely random. It's a calculated risk that everyone around him considered normal.
Exactly. But it's still an incredible way to go, given what he was trying to do. The only competent one, arguably, gets taken out by a sport designed for rich people to cosplay war.
And once Geoffrey's gone, the power dynamics shift hard, right?
They do. Removing a skilled mediator manipulator changes the whole internal balance. Those Angevin conflicts didn't magically stop. If anything, the remaining players leaned even harder into their worst instincts. Richard and John become the headline acts, and the empire's cohesion remains fragile.
It's like you remove the one person who understood how to manage the chaos, and now the chaos is a manager.
That's a good way to put it. And it also explains why Geoffrey is forgotten compared to his brothers. He doesn't get the same epic warrior branding as Richard. He doesn't get the infamous legacy of John. His influence is more subtle, and his story ends before he can fully cash in on his long game.
Let's pull out the educational thread for a second. If someone's listening and thinking, okay, fun family drama, but what does this teach me? What's the takeaway?
3 things. First, regional politics matter. Brittany isn't a footnote, it's a reminder that medieval realms were not centralized nation-states. Power was negotiated constantly, and local elites had real agency.
Second, dynastic strategy is basically an arms race of marriages and promises.
Right. It's long-term planning through family ties, titles, and legitimacy. And third, internal conflict can be just as dangerous as external war. The Angevin Empire wasn't primarily threatened by some outside invader at every moment. It was threatened by its own ruling family treating governance like a winner-takes-all tournament.
A tournament, you say? Too soon.
Too soon. But yes, Geoffrey's life is a case study in how competence operates inside unstable systems. Even the smartest strategist can't control every variable, especially when your job includes riding a horse at high speed while armored.
So where does the royal idiot's angle land if Geoffrey is a competent one? Are we calling him an idiot?
I think the angle is that the whole environment is idiotic. It's a world where the path to legitimacy includes doing violence performatively, where family politics are routinely settled by rebellion, and where a person's ability to rule can be sabotaged by a recreational near-death experience that everyone calls tradition.
So Geoffrey isn't the idiot, the system is. But also, if you're the one competent guy in a room, maybe don't participate in the group's favorite lethal pastime.
Fair. Though in his defense, opting out might have looked like weakness, and weakness was basically an invitation for your relatives to start redecorating your territory with their flags.
Medieval leadership lesson. You can be brilliant, but you still have to show up to the dumb pageantry, because politics is perception.
And in the Plantagenet family, perception comes with a lance.
Let's end on this. If Geoffrey had lived, what do you think changes?
We can't rewrite history, but it's tempting to imagine a Geoffrey who survives long enough to become the key broker between factions, or even to better consolidate Brittany as a stable base. Maybe the brothers don't spiral the same way. Or maybe they do, and Geoffrey just becomes better at surviving it. But his death removes a uniquely sharp player at a moment when the dynasty is already cracking.
So he's the almost winner. The guy who had the plan, had the patience, had a leverage, and then history hit him with a literal sports injury.
That's Geoffrey of Brittany, the forgotten schemer, the potentially most dangerous Plantagenet brother, and the tragic reminder that in medieval politics, the most hazardous battlefield might be the one labeled entertainment.
Next time you're watching a sport and someone says, it's just a game, remember Geoffrey. For him, it was a career-ending move.
And on that note, thanks for listening to Royal Idiots. If you enjoyed this mix of medieval strategy and catastrophic judgment, stick around. We've got plenty more crowns, castles, and bad decisions ahead.